Tyler, there aren't many women in Lord of the Rings, but if you had to identify the most badass woman of them all, who would you go with?
For most of my time in the Lord of the Rings fandom, I would have said Eowyn, but I'm coming off a pretty recent rewatch of the Peter Jackson movies, and I was just, for whatever reason this time, I was just feeling Galadriel.
This is weird. I have also just finished rewatching the Peter Jackson trilogy.
Great movies. 3 bangers
but
in a
I
row.
was like newly struck by how amazing Eowyn is. The battle between her and the Witch King of Angmar.
Yeah.
And when she cries out like, I am no man, and she rips off. I mean, like, what are we doing? She's clearly...
We're already off the rails here, but that's okay. Can I tell you my long-standing wish for a film trilogy is The Muppets Lord of the Rings, in which Miss Piggy is Eowyn at the end, and she gets to do her like, moi is no man. Hi-ya! And she like karate chops does her karate chop thing. I see it in my mind. Disney, I'm available. I don't have a lot going on right now. I have one podcast that I have to do. And other than that,
this series has become a vehicle for pitching Tyler's film trilogy ideas.
It probably won't be the last movie that I pitch during this podcast.
I'm in full support of this. I'm in full support.
Thank you.
From Religion News Service, this is Saved by the City, Apocalyptic Edition. I'm Katelyn Beaty.
And I'm Tyler Huckabee. And ApocryFUN, by popular demand, is now a ongoing monthly series. Katelyn, I did not really anticipate this, so I'm already in sort of uncomfortable waters here. I've just had this idea for this little podcast, and I thought I'd be able to get this bug out of my system, 3 or 4 episodes, exercise those demons, as it were, and then I'd move on to the next thing. But the numbers were strong, I'm told. The fans were there. People liked what I was putting down.
Yeah.
So now we are back with the real deal.
Yes. So I'm sure a lot of our listeners know what we're doing, but ApocryFUN was a wintertime series about books from the 90s and 2000s that shaped American evangelicals, including you and my regular co-host, Roxanne Stone. We got so much feedback from y'all that you really liked it. Like, maybe some trauma bonding going on with a couple of the books.
Yeah, I'm not going to say this is a positive development, but we're here anyway.
It's good to process the impact that these books have had on us and on many of you, and that is definitely true for today's episode. We are talking about Stasi Eldredge's book, Captivating. Are you ready to be captivated?
I am truly born ready to be captivated.
Right? Yes. Yes.
When this book first came out, were you captivated, girly?
So I will admit, I knew about this book. I was in college when it came out. I was kind of finishing college. I think I was pretty much out of reading all the evangelical bestsellers, but a woman who I babysat for had this book on her kitchen table. And I remember looking at the cover and kind of flipping through it and being like, hell no. I was a budding Christian feminist. A book with a woman in a twirling skirt on the cover. I kind of intuited, not for me.
You were familiar with Wild at Heart.
I was definitely familiar with Wild at Heart. I believe I read portions of it. By the way, as a plug, I thought your episode about Wild at Heart, I was like, I want to be there. Why am I not in the room where this is happening?
We did Wild at Heart. And for people who don't know somehow, if you're listening to this, I have to assume you're aware. But following the runaway success of Wild at Heart, which was a book about how men need to reclaim their Braveheart energy for a new generation of the church to really make church manly again. The follow-up, one of the follow-ups, was this book, Captivating, which was mostly written by John Eldredge's wife, Stasi, and it's Wild at Heart for girls. And as we discussed in the Wild at Heart episode, a lot of women don't necessarily see themselves in Wild at Heart in its framework of how gender operates, or how gender is supposed to operate within a healthy church. So I think to meet that need, Stasi comes through with Captivating, which is supposed to bolster the argument for how women should behave in a godly Christian gender dynamic. Does that sound the most neutral way of putting it?
Yeah, I mean, from a purely cynical capitalistic framework, which is a really easy framework for me to work from, Wild at Heart is this amazing bestseller. It's obviously meeting a felt need. It's hitting this nerve. men and women are reading it. John Eldredge becomes a household name. It only seems fitting from a publishing standpoint that they're like, you know what we need to do next? We need to do Wild at Heart, but for women. And let's tap John Eldredge's wife, Stasi, to do this in a way that just happens to be quite complementary to John's main teaching points about what it is to be a man.
Oh, it's totally simpatico. Yeah.
So we'll get to that. But
yeah.
Were you aware of this book like 20 years ago?
Oh, yeah. I was aware of this book. I think I was probably in a very similar situation as like you were describing. The best-selling list at Lifeway was no longer a must-read for me by the time this book came out. I think I had already talked to enough women who had expressed how unhappy they were with Wild at Heart that by the time Captivating came out, I wasn't super curious about it, and I was probably a little bit insufferable about the things I was reading. Like, I only read cool books, so I definitely was not to be caught dead reading Captivating, for better or worse.
Like the DC Talk Voices of the Martyr Bible translation.
If it didn't have a faux distressed cover and uneven pages along the binding, then I was not interested.
I need to feel the roughness on the edges of the pages.
Just like my own authentic soul. That's how you know it was a match made in heaven. I had not actually read this book until we decided to do it for this podcast.
Samesies. Yeah. So, like a little bit of a teaser.
Yeah.
I didn't hate it.
Interesting. I am so surprised. I was excited to have this conversation. Now I'm on pins and needles.
Okay. Well, I will reveal my thoughts in due
I'm not
time.
Say anything. I'm just sitting my patriarchal ass down and listening.
This is a safe space for men as well. When we're talking about essential masculinity and femininity defined in a very essentialist way, we are talking about like oftentimes how men and women relate, and like the way we define one is going to shape how we relate to others. So do you feel freedom to speak?
Do I feel heard? I feel freedom, which is very important in the Eldredge worldview. I'm only worried that I'm going to say something so feminist, our listeners may not be ready for it. That's my real concern.
I'm worried about being out feministed.
We'll work on the phrasing a little bit, but yeah, I get you. We should probably do the quiz before we go much further into that.
We got to do the quiz.
I'm nervous about this one.
That was the part of the previous ApocryFUN episodes that I was most like, oh, that sounds so fun. So I'm so glad we get to do it now.
Okay.
And I am testing you on Captivating. I hope that's okay.
That is totally fine.
Okay, we're starting in the Shire. This is just a cozy
right there
afternoon
with you.
Leisurely stroll around the Shire. Okay, first question, according to Stasi Eldredge, in the heart of every woman is a desire for three things. Can you name one of them?
Oh, what was it? Because it was like the mirror image of the Wild at Heart. It's like to be desired, or like beauty to be fought for. Is that how she phrases it? Yeah?
Yeah.
Beauty to be fought for, a adventure to like join or to come alongside.
Yes.
So Robin to somebody's Batman.
Without the queer overtones.
Well, yeah. Well, for sure. I'm missing one, but I can't remember what it is.
I mean, you already have two of the three. Yeah. You only needed one. Yes. According to Stasi Eldredge, in the heart of every woman is a desire to be romanced. So that's like the pursued thing, to play an irreplaceable role in a great adventure. So that's the sidekick.
That's Robin, yeah.
And to unveil beauty.
Okay, that's right. So it's like all women are beautiful. Like I said, we all agree with that. And they want to be able to like display that.
Yes.
Like be recognized for the beauty that they inherently have.
Yes. Ding, ding, ding. Very, very good.
Thank you. As somebody who's known so many women, none of that came as a surprise to me.
You're like, check, check, check. Every woman I've ever met. Okay. Number two, just like its predecessor, Captivating draws on a lot of movies. There's like so many movies, which I like as a principle, I do not mind. It's just striking. Yeah. They draw on a lot of movies to illustrate what women are made for. I counted 18. Can you name 4 of them?
I know Lord of the Rings was in there.
And you can't count the trilogy. Like the trilogy is 1.
3. Bam, bam, bam. I do believe we got some Braveheart in there too. I think it may have been part of a broader hero's journey thing, but wasn't there Star Wars? Wasn't there a Princess Leia reference?
Not that I caught.
Not that you caught? Okay.
Is there something about Princess Leia in it?
I thought so. The book is actually, I left it at where I got my haircut this morning, so I don't have it with me.
Oh no. You have 2 movies.
Okay.
Can you think of 2 more?
There was Disney, Beauty and the Beast?
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of the princess movies get a reference.
Yes.
I feel like there was an extra reference to Beauty and the Beast.
Yes.
And there was another one too. Was it Mermaid?
Yeah. I mean, shoot a dart at like a Disney princess movie. They mentioned it. Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast. Like, there's a lot of princessy stuff in this book, which we'll get to. But so 2 out of 3, you've already won according to Wait, Don't Tell Me rules.
I'll take it. I want to go for gold.
Stacey talks a fair amount about women's relationships with their dads, which we will also get to. And she talks about how like every little girl growing up kind of wants to be like adored, admired by her dad. And she points to kind of a piece of clothing or something that a little girl would wear to kind of capture this desire.
Oh.
What is the piece of clothing? This is a multiple choice.
Okay. I'll tell you right now, I do not remember reading this. So this is going to be a shot in the dark, but I'm ready to guess.
Okay. A purity ring. B, a tiara. C, a skirt to kind of twirl around in.
Yeah.
Or D, a no fear t-shirt.
Well, I know that my taste in women notwithstanding the no fear t-shirt, that's a woman to look out for.
I wasn't allowed to wear them.
Were you allowed to have the Christian knockoff, the no fear, NOFEAR, is like the Christian parody?
Sadly, no. I would have taken that.
Oh man, terrible.
Well, we've already established I was bad at sports. And also, they were too like aggressive to my parents.
Sure. Well, probably for Stacey, they'd be the same thing.
Yeah.
I feel like knowing what I know about the Eldredges, the skirt is a strong contender. I'm going to say that's the answer.
Yes. The twirling skirt.
Was that your experience?
I mean, there's so much about this book that I was like, is that true? Because part of the challenge that you present to readers when you are operating from a framework that this is the essence of what it means to be a man or a woman.
Totally.
Is like immediately you're laying down a universal description. And immediately many readers will say like, yeah, but that wasn't true of me. Like Stacey spends a lot of time talking about what all little girls want. Like all little girls dream of being princesses. And truthfully, like I just never had a princess face. I loved The Little Mermaid. It was not true of me that I like wanted to be a princess.
That's hard.
But not because I was like a burgeoning feminist. I just was interested in other things, you know? Yeah, that's like a fundamental barrier to their entire project.
It's a problem because that was very much my experience with Wild at Heart too, where I read some things in there where I'm like, yeah, that kind of grokks with what, when I was a little boy, what I wanted to be, what I saw like as being the ideal man. But sports were really not a part of that. And in Eldredge's framework, that is something that comes up quite a bit.
So 3 out of 3.
Yeah.
You nailed the pop quiz.
Well, I am a feminist, so that's not surprising.
So we should probably talk about why we picked this book. We've already covered some of it, but let's talk about like, what is this book and why is it important for us to talk about? When
I started talking to you about you coming on here and what books you'd be interested in, this was one of the 4 or 5 that you sent. It was a fairly, I think, successful book, right? It did some numbers.
Yes. Stacey's website claims that it has sold over 3 million copies worldwide. I'm going to bet it probably didn't sell in the same way that Wild at Heart did. But
yeah, no.
Still, like, massive bestseller. There was an expanded edition that came out in 2021, which kind of surprised me because I thought, like, are these ideas outdated? Like, are they of a different era? Apparently not. According to my inside sources, the expanded edition sold 500 copies just last week.
That's wild to me. Like, how is that possible?
I don't know.
This happened with some other book we were talking about on here, like Purpose Driven Life or something like that. It's like every time a cricket chirps, somebody buys a copy of that book. Like, what is going on? Is it churches buy these things en masse?
That has to be it. Word of mouth, great Amazon ads. You know, you type in like Christian woman.
I guess that's true. Yeah.
Just like no marketing or publicity effort whatsoever. Just like in 1 week, it sells 500 copies. So it keeps chugging along. I would be willing to bet the Eldredges are a household name in a lot of evangelical
for sure.
homes. So this book, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you about it was anything about gender in the church is a very core and perennial issue that I like to think and talk about.
Mm-hmm.
This book is not about gender roles in the church. It's not really about gender roles. And Stacey kind of articulates that really explicitly up front. Like, this is not a book about telling you how to be the Proverbs 31 wife or like play a kind of submissive, subservient role in relation to your husband and other men.
She kind of does that. This isn't your mom's Christian book for women. Like, this is your grandma's. Yeah, she really comes in hot, kind of like her husband does. It puts that same sort of like feminized version of a badass sheen onto what it's telling women here, even though a lot of the book is kind of explicitly about them not being badasses.
Yeah, I'm not sure that Stacey is effective at like helping women break out of a subservient role. But
sure,
I appreciated that it wasn't about like, can women tell men traffic directions? You know, like all the books and resources out there about submission and headship. I felt like it was trying to move beyond that in a way that I found better than what I was expecting.
It's definitely not John Piper. I could imagine for a lot of women raised in evangelical churches, a lot of stuff in here probably came across as fairly radical.
Yes, I would agree.
We'll get into that in just a second. But first,
a word from the organization that makes it all possible.
Religion News Service is an independent, award-winning source of global reporting on religion, spirituality, culture, and ethics.
From Anglicans to Zoroastrians, RNS has religion covered A to Z.
And if you like what we're doing here on ApocryFUN or what Roxy and Katelyn are doing in Saved by the City, let us know. Throw us a rating or a review. That really does go a long way towards helping get the word out about the show. Really appreciate everybody who has done that so far. Please keep doing it if you haven't done that yet. That helps a lot.
Also, listeners, you may have inferred that ApocryFUN will be joining the Saved by the City podcast universe. We plan to do ApocryFUN episodes once a month. So if you have suggestions for books you'd like us to cover, we'd love to hear them.
You can hit us up on social media. You can find us in all the usual places, most of the usual places. I don't think we're on X or Twitter. I don't call it X. I call it Twitter.
You can also email us at sbtcpodcast@religionnews.com. Send us your ideas.
Okay, so we're going to get into the meat of the book now.
Yeah.
We've kind of chewed around the candy center. It's time to get into that cream filling. Feels
sure.
like it's going a weird direction already, but we're not going to stop.
Yeah, so if your hairstylist found your copy of Captivating and she's like, this looks interesting. What is this book about? What would you say?
Oh, I'd want to be really careful. I would say that this is a book about how maybe the idea of femininity has sort of been lost and damaged and tarnished and poorly understood by our culture and by our society and certainly by our faith institutions. And this book is about reclaiming the true essence of what it means to be a woman as it was originally created to be by God.
Yeah, that's really good.
That'd be a really nice way of me saying it.
And if she was like, oh, okay, I don't know about that. But like, apparently this book is a bestseller. Like, why are so many women resonating with this? What would you say?
That is a great question. And I don't know that I know the answer to it. There's a good number of Christians out there who are very invested in a binary view of gender in the culture. And they would say that Captivating and Wild at Heart make a really strong and maybe even beautiful case for why that's supposed to be, why the binary is the way God created things and why we should try to keep it that way.
Yeah. It struck me that for like an explicitly Christian framing of masculinity and femininity. There aren't that many stories or examples from scripture, which I realize is like, I'm out evangelicaling the evangelicals.
No, but it's really true. Even in the book, it has to stretch.
Yeah, like I feel like it's telling that there are so many more examples from kind of pop culture tropes of femininity than there are from scripture, because there isn't one trope of femininity in scripture. Like there's actually a more multivalent representation of women in scripture than there is in like Disney princess movies. So I feel like that's one of the first tells that perhaps the Eldredges are turning to what a lot of people grow up kind of feeling on a gut level, like, yeah, that's true. Women are beautiful, or women are supposed to be beautiful. Like, and just kind of baptizing it with a spiritual framework. I have to think that this book, part of why it connects or has connected is because a lot of women experience being a woman to be incredibly difficult and a source of like pain or frustration.
Sure.
In the same way that Wild at Heart meets a similar kind of need for men. I don't think the answer is right. I think it's way too simplistic to be helpful in the long run. But I honor the kind of felt need that these books are meeting.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I think this was true of Wild at Heart as well, where they're not exactly wrong. Like, I don't think anybody, to Wild at Heart's point, looks at the culture and is like, men are doing really well, actually.
Right.
We don't need to be addressing men today. Like, I don't think anybody thinks that.
Right.
There's a lot of different opinions about what needs to happen, how the clear problem with masculinity in our culture needs to be addressed. I would say, from my perspective, Captivating is in a very similar place in that it correctly diagnoses that being a woman in America, and especially in the church, which it completely addresses, is extremely difficult and often very painful, and women are not living their best lives, as it were, in the church right now. And I think that it is really healthy to say that. You know, this is pre-Me Too movement, when there was even this idea that maybe we need to be doing something about any of this. So I'm glad that it diagnosed that, and that's probably the felt need is probably exactly what you were talking about, why people are still buying this. Is it working? I'll be curious to hear what you think about that when we start moving into the solution part of the book.
Well, to recount like the three things
yes.
that all women are created for. And I feel like that's probably a tell just to start off, like, only three things like, that just happen to perfectly align with the other three things.
Right. The yang to Wild at Heart's yin.
Yeah. I mean, the three things that, according to the Eldredges, every woman is made for is to be romanced, to play an irreplaceable role in a great adventure, and to unveil beauty. They explicitly say that the beauty one is the capstone.
That's the big one, which is crazy.
And so they say many times, and when I should say as an aside, the reason I keep saying they is that John and Stacey are actually co-authors of this book. And there are portions of the book that are written by John, although from an editorial perspective, there's no indication that it's John, except when he's like, I'll be honest, I didn't want to co-author this book. Why are you here? Is it literally just that we needed John Eldredge's name? The cover is John and Stacey Eldredge.
I was really curious about that. Did she have like lifelong aspirations of being an author and this was her chance? Or was John like, hey, women really need this, honey. I'll help you even. I'll help you.
Yes.
It makes for a very disjointed reading experience, even if editorially, it all sounds like it was written by the same person in terms of just like voice and style, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
Which probably just means the editor did their job.
Yeah. It's a weird reading experience, in part because when we're talking about gender and womanhood, it's going to sound different coming from a woman versus coming from a man. There's one line toward the end of the book that is John writing. And he says, quote, women pretty much fall into one of three categories. Tell us, John. Dominating woman, desolate woman, or arousing woman. I'm like, what?
Get you and two friends together. And if neither of them are the arousing woman, then guess what?
Well, I guess I have to be desolate today. Yeah, it's just like, what are we doing? These are the most obvious, unhelpful tropes about women.
It's like two steps away from the old ball and chain. Such a like comedy, like stand-up comic idea of what Dame is like back at the ranch.
Exactly. I mean, that was the absolute nadir of my reading experience.
Yeah.
But when Stasi writes, so she shares a lot, especially in the first portion of the book, about like her childhood and growing up years. She writes candidly about being on this trip to Europe in college and being both sexually assaulted and raped on that trip. She talks about kind of like drug and alcohol. So I felt, again, to your point, that this is presenting itself as perhaps like, this isn't your mom's Christian womanhood book. Like, I felt like the book was trying to honestly name real barriers that women face in the real world.
Yeah.
There are tons of stories from like other women whose stories they're recounting about being in abusive marriages or like growing up in abusive. So I appreciated that there was honesty about those things.
I did too. And it made the discussion of like wounds and like pain feel way more valuable. I think that in Wild at Heart, when it talks about the father wound, it's a very ephemeral idea of what pain is. There's no real, it's kind of like daddy was mean or didn't see me for who I really was. These are real things. Those are difficult. I'm not belittling that. I understand how hard that is, but it is a very different world from the sorts of pain that Stasi writes about here in Captivating, and healing from those things is a magnitude of a different process. And men obviously men deal with sexual assault and things like that as well, but that is not really touched on at all for reasons that are probably understandable in Wild at Heart.
Yeah, there's a portion of the book early on that kind of reminded me of the womanhood speech in Barbie.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Like, this book came out like over 20 years ago, and like
her influence.
Well, we all know Greta Gerwig needed to probably cite Noah Baumbach for that speech, is what I've heard.
Yeah.
But if not that, then she needed to claim Stasi Eldredge as her source.
It was a group effort. Noah and Greta and Stasi and John all writing together.
So let's come back to like the daddy thing.
Okay. This is a good part for me to like listen.
Oh, well, not necessarily. I have a great relationship with my daddy.
Oh, God.
I don't think I ever called my father. To be clear, I am talking about my biological father right now. I don't think I even called him daddy when I was like 4. I think he was always dad. Anyway, so yes, there is this father wound that both the Eldredges are talking about. Stasi says a girl growing up doesn't want anything more than like her father's like love and affection and protection, and if she doesn't have that early on, it like messes everything up. Like, definitely the implication is like even more so than if you don't have a great relationship with your mom.
Oh, for sure. Yeah,
that's hard, but like a lot of these problems, so to speak, come from some kind of broken relationship with your dad. One of the things that Stasi encourages is to begin thinking of one's relationship to God in these paternal terms, which there's a strong precedence for this in church history. But like, I don't want to call God daddy. Because there is also this theme of God being the lover of your soul and like wooing you. I'm like, wait a minute. Okay, is God like my daddy or my daddy?
Because there's both the sort of like, there's the paternal thing, which most people are pretty familiar with. And there's also like, at times, a sort of romantic, maybe like PG-13 sexual implication to some of the ways that God is discussed in this book, which Eldredge has written about that in Sacred Romance, where he very explicitly makes the case for a relationship with God having a romantic timbre to it, biblically.
For women and men.
For women and men, yeah. But in this one, it's confusing only in that the terms are never defined super well. I wasn't sure if they were intentionally trying to make me think like God is daddy versus God is daddy, or if I just have a dirty mind. I don't know. Both are true.
No, I don't think you have to read into things too far to ask, like, okay, so is God like my lover who's taking me out on a nice date, and like if I wear a nice dress, he's like, you look dazzling or whatever. Like, I think they're pretty explicitly saying that is a dimension of how women should relate to God. And I just, it's too weird for me. It's just too weird.
Especially when you have it both in here, when it's a book about both dads and daddies and husbands and healing. Like, it's all on this big stew, which isn't to say these things aren't there in scripture in some capacity. You can't find some sort of interpretation of God as lover in the Bible. And I think that's probably, there's good things to take from that framework. But in this book, it's just strange. And it's maybe a little unmindful of how complicated that relationship is for women and just how they relate to the world generally.
What else stood out to you about this book? And why were you earlier nervous to talk about it?
I was nervous to talk about it because there were so many things where I was like, ooh, I don't know about that. But it's not directed at, like, I wouldn't know about that. So speaking into it or critiquing it or criticizing or editing any part
like
of it was
who am I
kind of
to
like, well, I don't
say?
know. Yeah. Ostensibly, at least a good chunk of the book is a woman writing about her own experience as a woman in the church. And I think unearthing some good things along the way. But when something kind of rubbed me the wrong way, is that just my own experience, or is that my own incuriosity, or is that my own little knee-jerk misogyny and me being like, well, what does she know? Or I'm sure that's not how that guy meant it. I was second-guessing myself a lot, especially when you said you didn't hate it. Not that
really
I hated
put the
it,
fear
because I
in you.
didn't. But yeah, it put the fear of God in me.
To be clear, I will never read this book again, and I would not recommend it.
Okay.
I'm thinking about like a teenage Christian girl who's like, I don't know, I have questions about like identity or growing up or whatever. This would not be on the list.
If I had a critique of it that I feel pretty confident in, it is how prescriptive it is. As we were talking about earlier, really, according to this book, there's really only one way to be a woman, which is the exact same issue that I had with Wild at Heart. There's really only one way to be a man in this world, and you are absolutely feeling these three things. And if you aren't, I don't know, it doesn't even really get into, if you don't relate to this, then what does that mean? Because the assumption is, well, you just clearly are. It doesn't even need to really be addressed.
Right. If you don't resonate with these three things that are true of every woman, that speaks to some wounding in you. Like, that's clearly like a malformation. Like the second thing that all women desire, which is to accompany a man on a great adventure, essentially. Right. My thought is like, I am already in the great adventure of my life.
Yeah. You're not waiting for Mr. Right to find an even bigger adventure.
No. Why can't I just be on the great adventure? There are tons of stories in popular culture about like women who are going on quests of literal and metaphorical varieties. Like the prescriptive elements very much felt like things that really only happen in relationship with men or a man. Like these things are only activated when you have a man to unveil your beauty to, or, you know, to pursue you or to join on a great adventure. And like, I'm sorry, if I were living with that belief about what it means to be a woman, I would be living a very passive life.
Well, yeah, you'd be like darning socks, like Rapunzel, waiting for someone to come climb up your ponytail, right? Like, it just feels like so much of this is dependent on a certain type of guy just like swooping into your life with his adventure, whatever that means in this context, all ready to go, which I suppose is usually some sort of career situation or family or buying a ranch out in Colorado.
The adventure I have for you is, so I'm going to go back to school. You stay at home. Yeah. It's going to be such an adventure for you. I know this is not what the Eldredges are saying, but like how these things work out in the lives of a lot of, you know, Christian heterosexual couples is women find that they're not, in fact, on a great adventure. They feel like, I'm kind of passively going along with this person's adventure. My primary role is to just like support him in what he wants to do.
Well, you're facilitating his adventure. You take care of the kids and the house stuff so that he can have the adventure that God has called him to. And I guess you are part of his adventure in that sense. and that he couldn't do it without you, but you don't really get any of the shine. There's no perks of it.
Right.
If we said this to the Eldredges, they would push back on that very strongly.
Right.
But you need to address that right out of the gates, because this is how an awful lot of Christian couples end up living.
Yeah, I mean, similarly with the desire to unveil beauty, they say multiple times, we're not just talking about physical beauty, we're talking about soul beauty. There's this like essence to a woman who's comfortable in her own skin, who is gentle and quiet and makes everybody else feel comfortable. That's a beautiful soul. And that's what every woman, like, okay, but you keep talking about princesses. And the thing about all princesses is that they're beautiful.
No ugly princesses.
And if there are, they get turned into beautiful women.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I know you're trying not to do that, but it is really hard to walk away from this book without thinking that women should be investing a lot of time and energy into their physical beauty and appearances, because that is apparently like the capstone of what they bring to the world. Which also just feels like we're just taking the easiest cultural trope about womanhood and like baptizing it with thin theology.
You see this in so many of these books when it comes out of the gates promising to not be like, not your grandma's Christian book for women, to deliver something really different. And then by the end, it really falls into the exact same lines. Like there's nothing in this book that is terribly radical or really advocates for a way of being a woman that is remotely at odds with the general cultural idea of what women should be doing, that has been a resounding failure, that has resulted in a lot of broken hearts and insecurity and depression, and is not getting a lot better.
Right.
So I feel like both with this and with Wild at Heart, it just kind of comes through with the exact same bullshit that we'd been getting all along, even though I think it does a better job. I think they both do a better job of highlighting the reality that there is a problem. So this is the point where I have to come down on one side or the other. Did you find this book ApocryFUN, or was it apocryphal?
I'm going to go apocryphine. And maybe my bar going into this was like so low.
Sure.
Like I really expected to be throwing my Kindle across the room. I did forcefully close it a few times, but I think it's an interesting commentary on like modern women's experiences and what they're looking for. I think it fails as a prescriptive lens. Like I said, I would not give this to someone and say, this is going to help you. This is going to fix everything. Like I find it an interesting phenomenon. So apocryphine, where did you land?
I would say probably
you don't have
similar.
To say fine because the woman said, do you know what I mean?
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you for seeing me and acknowledging me and elevating my experience as an ally. I think that you said theologically flimsy earlier, and I like apocryflimsy a little bit because it does seem like this is something that we've seen in so many of these books. Roxy and I've seen it, and we'll continue to see it through a lot of ApocryFUN, is taking this dominant cultural trend and throwing some Jesus vocabulary in there as a way of making the status quo biblically justified. And I think that is really unfortunate because it seems like they are, in this case, John and Stacey are a little closer to something that could actually be pretty special and important.
Yeah.
I'm not a gender essentialist myself, and I know that a lot of people who are born with a certain gender will come to this book and either not see themselves at all, or will see themselves in the book they're not supposed to see themselves in, which makes everything even more complicated and confusing.
Right.
And I want to really acknowledge that for some people, this could end up being a step backward or hurtful or reinforced certain things that have ended up being very, very damaging and confusing and ostracizing for them. But I think that if I can take it just as a exploration of the reality that there is something kind of broken in the way our culture has treated women, which I think is undeniably true, and acknowledging that the church has been a part of that, which I think was at the time enormous, probably in a way that we may not even might be hard to grok today. That keeps it out of the foul territory for me.
Yeah, I'd say if you read this And then you read The Making of Biblical Womanhood by Beth Allison Barr. It'll like all come out in the wash and you'll be okay.
I thought about doing that, like plugging a better version of the book, like what the book could have been. And yeah,
Yes.
Beth's book would be a good
palate cleanser.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Hey, I think we did it. I think that's the first episode of this as a new regular podcast.
Yeah.
Katelyn, thank you for being willing to try this experiment with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. When I was listening to your and Roxy's conversations, I was like, I want to be in the room. This sounds fun. So,
was it fun? Did it live up to your expectations? Oh, wow.
A Tuesday afternoon on a work day is not the most fun time of the week.
Well, we weren't usually doing them over happy hour or anything like that. I don't know what you thought.
But we should.
Soon enough. I'm coming up there to New York in a couple of months for Roxy's wedding, so maybe we'll be able to do some live on the scene.
Oh, yeah. Let's do it.
Well, thank you very much for that. We are going to be back. I'll be here every time. We'll have sort of a rotating cast of characters sitting in for Roxy and for Katelyn this week. So already got some exciting guests planned, some exciting books planned, but by all means, reach out to us if you have more ideas for who should be on and what we should be reading.
What's one book that you know you're going to talk about soon that you're like the most jazzed about?
Just because I love reading these books for women. Redeeming Love is coming down the pipe.
Oh.
I have a very exciting guest. Don't want to give it away, but we got a good one in for Redeeming.
ApocryFUN is a project of Say by the City and is a religion news service production. Our senior producer is Jay Woodward, and the consulting editor is Paul O'Donnell. We get production assistance from Julia Wyndham. Chaz Russo put together our look, and Martin Fowler wrote our theme music. We are Katelyn Beaty. And Tyler Huckabee. I am no man! Okay, I think this is what is a sports metaphor for an easy thing? A layup. Blind leading the blind here, but I think that, let's go with layup. Can we go back to the Lord of the Rings stuff? I was on I was a lot safer ground with Lord of the Rings stuff.